Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So today we are going to be talking about, well, Battleground Season 31. And this time around we're going to be talking about a victory track meta specifically. So much of this is going to be a mixture of my initial impressions of the meta because of season has started, as well as kind of predictions. And first, let's break down the nodes themselves and then look on the potential MVPs and basically the champions that I'm running in my deck as well. Because that's just about the same, I believe, but obviously I will have overlooked some things as well. So, Invisible Woman's Finesse actually works best at just enabling you to, well, dex any hard to dex or undexable special attack, because you can just spam your dash back and then you're effectively untouchable for the duration of any special attack. So there are some interesting interactions with that, but let's focus more on the nodes, the defensive nodes. So Steady as She Goes is each time the attacker blocks an attack, defender gains inexorable passive. Basically gives them more defensive combat power rate and prevents you from pushing them back for 4 seconds. So 4 seconds is not a long time. However, effectively this manifests as opponents getting more combat power as you strike them if you do take hits in a block. So that is obviously preferably to be avoided. That is not always possible, however. So getting a good use of the Invisible Woman's Finesse and getting used to that is going to be kind of important there. And then Power Snack. And next buff triggered by attacker immediately is nullified. It has a 7-second cooldown. And each time this triggers, defender gains 25% bar power. Now, it has aggressive AI as well as Dauntless as always, but I'll be just brutally honest. At this level, the Power Snack is more of a nuisance than a deal breaker. Obviously, there are some specific champions that rely on like a big Fury buff or something like that, that you do need to pay attention to play around with this. But in most cases, this Power Snack is not potent enough to be like a massive deal breaker for a majority of the champions. There are some exceptions that make champions significantly slower or worse than they normally would. For instance, Red Skull getting all of his armor ups purified at the beginning of the fight is a very big hindrance to him offensively. And other champions that start with like a bunch of buffs like Okoye, because all of those kind of go away at the same time and she starts the fight with no precisions. And that's not making them unusable per se, but that's definitely making them less effective and slower because it affects their ramp up. But overall, when looking at this, especially in Victory Track, it's a fairly free format. You can kind of use majority of the champions and do well. It is a bit more tricky with Power Snack 2, and that grants opponents 50% of bar power, so that's double the potency, double the power gain there, as well as Inexorable passive is 50%, so more defensive combat power rate, and there's Placebo, which effectively forces you to trigger that much more often, and it's going to kind of change the rules more in favor for Mystic champions, Mystic defenders specifically. But when it comes to Victory Track, you can kind of get away with using vast majority of the champions. So which are the champions that I am personally using? Spider-Woman so far has been doing absolutely fantastic, especially when she's awakened and fairly high sig, because when you do get your Furies nullified by Power Snack, you can gain your passive Furies instead, so that's not that big of a deal, as well as her Petrify, whenever a buff expires, is, enabling you to get some of that power gain that opponent is getting. And overall, she has been quite phenomenal, both on attack and on defense as well. So a very solid dual purpose champion. We obviously have Titania, and Titania being immune to buffs, period, effectively gets rid of vast majority of the nodes. You only need to deal with the Inexorable, and that's not much of an issue for Titania in general. So Titania is fantastic. Despite her issue with the Silk Lock fix, she's very much so usable, and if there wasn't that issue, she would be one of the best champions for the meta. But now she's just kind of very good for it. We got Red Guardian again, immune to buffs. That's very good. And So he is an absolute nuke and functions perfectly. If you do have him, Photon is still going to be perfectly functional. Nothing wrong with using Photon. We have another meta where Count Nefaria can do very well by stealing opponents' power for himself and ramp up faster. So that is quite nice for him too. Silk, especially in Victory Track, is functioning great. Not so much in the Gladiator Circuit because she's pseudo-immune to buffs. She's immune to the Dexterity buff, right? So when placebo buffs get involved, then the power snack is going to get triggered, and then some of the matchups are not going to work as well. But in Victory Track, there's absolutely nothing stopping Silk from completely dominating the fights. And in Science Class in general, we do have more options as well. It obviously depends on which champions you have ranked. But there are more than enough capable champions. Luke Cage is actually very solid for this meta in particular. And then, Spider-Ham is putting in plenty amount of work as well. So Science Class is generally quite strong here because they do have access to the Petrify and Wither debuffs, which mitigate the power gain, or they have the buff immunities, so they can bypass the nodes that way. Moving on to the skill class, Yelena is in a good sporting form. She's a very solid defender. She's actually the best defender in the next meta, but in this one, she also does function quite well, giving her extra combat power rate or power snack triggers. Just lets her throw more special attacks, stalls the fights more, and gives you additional problems to deal with. Nick Fury, as always, doing just fine. Mantis is back, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with using Mantis because, again, power snack will affect her slightly, getting rid of one of her cruelties when you do go for the heavy attack and special 2, but for the most part, she functions just fine. Again, in Victory Track specifically, Crossbones is still more than capable. Yes, you will get some of your Furies eaten, but the 25% power gain is not really a deal breaker, and he works fine. And then we have Lumitrix, who's very solid for this because in general, him making AI super aggressive, and you can often do many of the fights without ever really having to dex or trigger that power snack because he doesn't have any innate buffs himself. And he's also a better defender because if you parry him, he's going to get increased combat power rate, which means he's going to be starting to spam special attacks more. And then, if you trigger power snacks, which you quite likely will against him, then again he gets more power, and he's fairly solid skill option. I have seen people use Hitmonkey as well. There's absolutely nothing stopping you from doing that. Bullseye is more dangerous because most champions kind of rely on being able to deal with Bullseye within X amount of special attacks, or the fight gets significantly harder, or you end up taking more chip damage, or it just takes way longer because you do need to wait out the wait and stuff like that. And effectively, Bullseye with increased combat power rate and Bullseye with power snack triggers, again, limits the amount of counters that can do him well and fast. For instance, Starhand Spider-Man is going to be worse against Bullseye because when you trigger the power snack, he's going to get to his specials quicker, which means you're going to be taking damage. And he's more effective than normal. And he's one of the defenders that gains fairly significant benefit there. Moving on to the mutant class, we do have Onslaught functioning, perfectly fine as always. He's not that fast about opponent's defensive combat power rate because you do not need to strike opponent a lot or bait out a lot of special attacks. It's more about you kind of establishing yourself up and making sure that everything's paused. And again, power snack, because he kind of has very controlled rotation, he works perfectly fine offensively and defensively too. Then we have Jean Grey. Jean Grey has been a very solid champion for me thus far in both of the upcoming metas. She's a solid defender. Obviously, people are getting better at countering her, but she's also super useful offensively in these metas. Then Domino, again, Domino with increased combat power rate and extra power gains, always going to be nastier than she normally would be, because that means you have more chances to get unlucky unless you have the tech counter, or she has more chances to go lucky even when you're using tech counters, which means you need to be more worried about their weight, and she functions very well. Mr. Sinister, basically, again, because of his slow playstyle, he's not that affected by the changes in opponents' power levels, and he works fine. And he's also nasty defender because you do need to take those concussions by pushing him to level 2 because he's going to have more combat power rate and he's going to get extra power. So you need to be worried of his level 1s, and yeah, he works decently well. From Cosmic, honestly, the best Cosmic offensively, I think, in this meta is just about Gallon because he's immune to the power snack, right? And then there's nothing stopping, from his damage being delivered. So if you do have Gallon, it might be worth looking into him there. And Maestro is quite solid here as well. And that is meant to be that obviously he's going to be a functional, decent defender, as he always is. But due to the nodes, he is better offensively too because he ramps up faster. Whenever Maestro is immune to an effect or has a buff nullified, gain 3 Neuronium. This has 5-second cooldown, which coincides quite well with Power Snack. So whether that is a dexterity buff that gets nullified, which it often will be, or one of your own buffs, you effectively will, see that you ramp him up faster, and he works effectively better than he normally would be. And then when you're meant to go for the full extent of your damage, those are passives anyway and are unaffected by the power snack, and then you can just kind of unleash the best you can. So yeah, Maestro can be a sneaky offensive champion in the meta too. Here we go, Dark Phoenix, again, one of the few champions that works both offensively and defensively, because when you get something nullified by power snack, you're just going to get a passive of whatever that was. And yeah, as a defender, she is more dangerous with extra specials, with extra no flames that you need to deal with, and she presents problems. And Serpent's nastier defender than he normally is in this meta, and that is largely due to the doubling up on that inexorable passive, because against him, with just about every champion, you are forced to block something, and well, almost always. And he already has increased defensive combat power rate with that passive, and now there's an additional one. That means he's going to be spamming more special attacks, which means he's going to be ramping up faster, which means you're going to be taking more block damage in most cases. And yeah, Serpent's quite nasty in this meta, without a doubt. Starkhand Spider-Man still very good functionally, and the main reason for that is because you can ramp up with him quite quickly and easily, and then you kind of nuke through the fight. He doesn't, encourage or rely on blocking any hits, so opponents often can't really get increased combat power rate in many of the matchups. He's still not as good against Bullseye as he normally would be, but most important matchups he can function perfectly fine, like against Zola, against Photon, obviously Onslaught, so on and so forth. So something to keep in mind, still very much so worthy champion. Arcade is a bit of a menace here as well, because within his playstyle, you do rely on block baiting his heavy attacks often, and that is going to give him more defensive combat power rate, which you do not want, because then you're going to have to deal with more special attacks and block bait more heavy attacks. And again, power snack gives him more special. So yeah, he is harder than he normally would be, and worth testing him out for this meta for sure. Offensively, we have Jack, one of the better tech options, doesn't rely on any buffs at all whatsoever, and that alone him kind of makes him better than many other tech options here, I would say. We have Shocker, again, similar reasoning. You do not rely on taking any hits in a block or on any buffs, so power string figures are limited, especially in victory track, and there's nothing stopping you from, nuking opponents as you normally would be with the Shocker. Prowler is actually a very interesting case here too, because even if you do give opponents more power with the increased defensive combat power rate and power stack, you kind of want that in order to ramp him up faster to those 30 Furies, and afterwards dealing with any excess power, well, he does that great with power draining and power locking them. So yeah, Prowler is actually kind of buffed up with these nodes, because he can ramp up faster and then he can completely negate the bad effects of it, if you will. So I actually do like Prowler for this meta too. Moving on to the Mystic class, whenever there's power snack, America Chavez is just perfect for it. She reverses opponent's power gain, and you can be more aggressive than you normally are, so she functions great. Enchantress, again, she's one of those meta merchant defenders. If some of the previous metas she wasn't that big of a defensive threat, obviously there's some defensive threat of her always, but in this meta in particular, again, she's significantly nastier than she normally is, especially in the Gladiator circuit, where you effectively will have very little options but to trigger all of the nodes, because as you strike her, placebo buffs then get nullified, then she gets extra power, and she's similar in a bullseye in a way, where you do want to put her away as quickly as possible without triggering as few special attacks as possible. And these node combinations just make it harder. So Enchantress is harder to deal with. And another effect of that inexorable passive is that you can't push her away. And in certain situations, that is extremely detrimental in this matchup, because you have to get in an intercept. But if you can't push her away, your playing field is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and you're having harder and harder time to get rid of those spells in particular. So definitely something to watch out for. She is more dangerous than normal. Nico, offensively, there's nothing really helping her. She's going to be fine-ish. She's not great. She's not awful. She doesn't rely on buffs. That's good, but she doesn't really have much of a power control. That's bad. What would you hope from a Mystic champion here? But she's actually a bit of a menace defensively here, because of all the extra special attacks and her own innate abilities. If you do not have a great counter, you're going to find yourself in a situation where she's just spamming special attacks at you, and she can be like a very tricky, finicky champion to go up against. Something to keep in mind. Shatra is back effectively to being perfectly usable. No damage mitigation, no massive regenerations to deal with, so there's nothing super helpful in her abilities, specifically to deal with the nodes, but overall, the amount of matchups that she can take, definitely warrants using her, in my opinion. Kindred, again, is significantly nastier than most champions on defense in this meta. And again, one more of those defenders that you do need to be very much so wary of, because Power Snack giving him extra power. That means, again, more special attacks, more things to be worried about. And then the Inexorable as well. Can be a significant issue, because vast majority of the champions are effectively kind of forced to take that level 1 hit in the block, and then if you want to be able to punish that, so yeah, Kindred can mess some people around for sure too. Juggy functioning fine in Victory Track. I don't know how well he will do in the Gladiator circuit with the more powerful Power Snack, but in Victory Track he can just kind of punch through it, and he's still an absolute menace. And then we have Tigra. Tigra, does fine. She doesn't really care that much about if in many of the matchups, opponent getting a bit of extra power and them shooting their specials is actually better for you, because then you can phase through them and immediately punish them, thus improving her speed. And so far in my testing, she's been doing perfectly fantastic. Obviously, there will be other champions that do function great. Do need to talk about Saga Attackers specifically, because utilizing that ability can be very powerful in some champions' case, and I'm going to try and highlight that. What is this? Saga champions. Here we go. So when it comes to... Hey, I did not know this guy. Fair enough. When it comes to... Oh, there's a bug currently with it, and I think all of the champions are getting Saga bonus, so I'm sure Kabam's going to patch that soon enough before the season starts. But with some of the champions, another very good, strategy perhaps, not strategy, but safer wall banking, or effectively you can be dashing back against the wall indefinitely with all of these champions, because you're going to be untouchable the entire time. And that means that you can wall bank safely, and you have easier time baiting out special attacks when you do get cornered against the wall. And that, definitely can be quite helpful in my opinion at times. It's just another kind of like fight strategy to be able to utilize, because of those cruelties, and the precision can improve the damage output of every single one of these champions here. So perhaps it's worth, keeping an extra eye out for as far as Victory Track is concerned. even though many of these champions are not the ones necessarily relying on a massive, crit rate or cruelty. But still, I definitely need to do more testing, but again, because it's bugged and it's currently affecting all the champions, it's a bit finicky to do that. There we go. So that's the upcoming meta. I will be making a video about the Gladius Circuit meta as well, because there are some champions that are definitely excelling more than others. But in general, it's such a nuky meta that it's going to be either love or hate type of relationship for many players. Anyways, that for the next video. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. I'll catch you guys soon. Bye-bye. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about